What's up, guys? Zanara here, and today I'm going to be talking about Artisaria versus all the lyrical decks. So, since her release, Artisaria has the ability to officially lock the opponent's rear guards in standard, and a lot of people feel like that. Oh, when Lyrical Cups drops, is going to be filled with Artisaria players and ruin the tournament, which I don't necessarily think that's the case. So I'm going to talk about my feelings and thoughts on every single lyrical deck versus Artisaria. So, yeah, let's just get it started. First, I'm gonna talk about the tiers. So we have advantaged, meaning that they have a good matchup against Artisaria. Neutral, which is 50-50, and it's like on a good day, bad day kind of thing. And we have disadvantaged, which means that they have a very poor matchup against Artisaria. Granted, I didn't test all these decks against Artisaria. This is just how I feel. So these could drastically change whenever we get results for Lyrical Cup and JP, or just, people playtesting in general. So this, again, this is not a tier list. It's just, separating them from decks to do good to her, against her, and decks that aren't so good against her. So, I'm going to start with Sagita. So, Sagita, well, before I start, I should really talk about our game plan. So far, for what I've been seeing from the Japanese meta, is that Artisaria is more so not a control deck, but more like a very late game heavy deck. Because most of her power comes from her tokens that get 5k, and you're able to just essentially spawn more when she attacks. So a lot of decks have been running cards that are super defensive, or give you a lot of defensive power in order to survive your opponent's turn. Usually because in the meta right now we have Bob Sakura, still Raziel, and Levidrus, and other decks that have been popping up that have a lot of high power. So she needs it in order to get to the late game for her to start actually combating some of their advantage. The thing is that it's a very slow deck because of that. So now I could get into Sagita. I think against Sagita, she's actually very advantaged against it, and Sagita is disadvantaged. Right. Like I said, I explained before, I'm going numb because I just talked about a whole hour about lyrical tier list. So, again, I mean, Sagita is disadvantaged against Artisaria. Not that Artisaria is disadvantaged against Sagita. So, I should just put an advantage then. Yeah. So, I guess Artisaria has the advantage against Sagita, because of Sagita's, she can't clear her rear guards in the front row. But when it comes to the long game, I think Artisaria have enough hand size and power to just kill Sagita. And she hasn't been just receiving a lot of support at all to combat anything in the meta. More so even lyrical decks, just because of how unsupported she is. And even throughout the main sets, nothing has really boosted her as well. Forenza, she's advantaged. Forenza, she doesn't have any way to combat her lock. So one lock can actually just kill Forenza or Fursilla. And also, her late game power is even stronger than Forenza. So yeah, there's not much more to explain there, because she has a bunch of vanillas, and you can only get power from your orders. And if one of your rear guards in the front row is locked, that's essentially all of your pressure now gone. Now you can still reset a column, but you want 5 attacks. Alestial, I think she's pretty neutral against Alestial. Alestial has the ability to clear a front row, but also she can neg her power, making it more harder to guard the attacks from Alestial. Plus, Alestial has ways of getting back like certain pieces and looping her persona rides. However, Alestial's late game is not as strong as Artisaria's if she gets off that condition of, having like 4 set orders in her set order zone. I don't think Alessia will be able to keep consistently guarding while also maintaining her main strategy. Medial, I think Medial's in the same place, because Medial necessarily doesn't have a lot of guard potential. She has a lot of power when it comes to her persona ride turns, but that's near to the late game where Artisaria can start getting more value, since Medio wants other copies of Medio at the drop zone, so she can get power to the front row. She also doesn't have a very strong early game, which gives Artisaria time to build advantage during that time. Her turn 3, if Artisaria is going second, can be very rough for Artisaria. But once Artisaria starts equalizing, I could see her winning, but also I could see Medio winning if she goes first too. So that's why I say it's neutral. Runa, again, English does not have this deck. I think Runa, even though in theory she's advantaged, like if she goes first like Medio, I think it's a lot harder, just because you do need specific orders to get the power, because your rear guards don't hit that high, and she can clear a front row, and her board pretty well too. But I think when it comes to power, I think she's disadvantaged. I mean, not disadvantaged. I think Artisaria has the advantage against Runa, even though she does, like I said before, she cleared the front row, get some power. I think Runa just doesn't have enough of a core to essentially beat Artisaria when it comes to late versions of the game. Now Hazoret, interesting enough, even though Hazoret can clear her board, I think it's still neutral, because even though she draws a bunch of cards, Artisaria can, like I said, the +2 order is really strong. Also, Hazoret needs a hand to call a board back. If Artisaria removes her hand for most of it, she's not going to have a strong clapback. Even though she can hit pretty decent numbers, Artisaria would have built up a hand the size already to be able to beat or, tank against Hazoret. So it's pretty 50-50. If Hazoret goes first, again, it's always like these goalie first, goalie second things. Hazoret can beat Artisaria. But if Artisaria goes first, I think it's more favored towards Artisaria at that point, because she has more time to get into her set orders to be live. Next is Vert. I'm going to put Artisaria's disadvantage for this one, because Vert can hit faster numbers than Artisaria while also clearing the front row, because she can actually play Yuika. These decks can play Yuika too, but Vert can play Yuika and not feel bad that if it gets locked for a turn, because that means you're not getting an extra token, so that Vert can actually draw and just convert off of it. And again, double Persona, if she Persona rides and does her axe skill, she's gonna have 20k to the front row with a Rosa that hits 15k by herself, or any other card that, that's generic enough they want to play. Artisaria can't guard that multiple times, even though it's a 4-attack deck. I think because Vert can also have a very decent early game, it makes it harder for Artisaria to actually last that long. Even if she goes first, I think Vert can still output pressure enough so that Artisaria can't get that much advantage. Coral, I will say the same thing. Albeit Coral can suffer from lock if the Coral player is not careful. It's just that Coral scales a lot faster than Artisaria when it comes to the critical and the power, because you can get this live instantly when your opponent's on grade 3, and her power scales for every 2 Corals in Soul, I believe, or 4. It's between those two, but your front row is able to hit better power than her tokens. So it's just one of those things where it can be really bad if Artisaria does go first and Coral doesn't play anything like a Yuika or to clear the board. But the thing is, her multi-attack is not 5, it's 4. You show off one big attack, but Coral can always restand one of the rear guards that that is still there on the board. So it's really the option if the Artisaria player wants to lock a Coral front row rear guard circle, or gain more, advantage from drawing with the Shout and Shadow. Wallista, I think this is a neutral matchup, more so to Coral, because Coral gets way more power faster than Wallista without Persona Ride. Wallista, you still need a Persona Ride to hit those absurd numbers, but Wallista can play Yuika, But a lot of lists has been opting out Yuka to run that new double R to get back your orders. And her rears are still in the front row. Also, Lock hurts a lot more in this deck than in Coral, because Coral's multi-attack, same for Ballista, is from the Vanguard, but Coral can only attack 4 times. Ballista can attack 5. So actually locking the front row rigor circle can hurt Ballista's game plan. Now for Felty, I think she's actually disadvantaged. It's hard like for someone who plays Felty Rose and myself, you can only lock Ortrude or like any other weird grade 1 that they play or that you could play. Even if you do lock that, it doesn't matter most of the time, because almost all of your cards but like Felty or a grade 1 can clear itself in the front row. Plus, eventually, since the deck is slow enough, Felty can get the 20k for your ghosts in the front row. And just like Vert is a lot more faster than Felty when it comes to that 20k front row. So Felty can potentially just close out the game just by doing that and clearing the front row at the same time with all archetypal cards. So I think Artisaria will be disadvantaged in that regard. Also, going second, like with Felty, could still allow her to get the 10k in her, the 10k for Ghost in the front row. So this is not locked behind, your opponent being grade 3 or greater. Lorinal, I think she's disadvantaged just because Lorinal is a late game deck too, but it's Vanguard centric. Sure, Laurel can attack multiple times in the front row, and they hit some pretty solid numbers too. But Laurel also is a set order deck that scales. And she can get a crit with a PG block, and Artisaria can't guard that eventually, right? Like, there might be some attacks that she can guard, but she can't guard every single attack. Once the Laurel player hits that end game, like, okay, I could just start doing this now. Since, most people use their PGs early against Laurel as the Vanguard, so that on their next turn they can actually survive. But Laurel has 2 Vanguards. The OGs is a lot stronger when it comes to power numbers. This one could just compress their deck and get cards they want. So Patroka, I'll say this one's neutral, because Patroka on a good day can probably just beat Artisaria before they even get to play the game. On a bad day, they can just get curb stomped because they don't draw any cards to, clear the front row. But also Artisaria is just kind of bad against restanding Vanguard decks. Because yes, Patroka can call a card to the Rigor Circle, but she can keep doing that. She can get Vanguard restand and, a Vanguard ride, and call another card that same turn. So she can still get 5 attacks. So she's not disadvantaged to the point where she can't win. It's still up to how good the Patroka player just draws and how good her luck is. Marlene. So I think Marlene she's kind of like Vert in a way that she can actually scale pretty well because you have consistent persona rides. However, depending on how you build your deck with Marlene, you can sort of fold to Aristaria's lock depending on how you go about it. But again, Marlene is such a generic card. You can play any generics, and there are other ways to clear your front row board too. So I would say she's advantaged for now, but she can become neutral. I don't think she's disadvantaged against Artisaria. Nef Clarissa, honestly, I think Artisaria has this one, because Clarissa really wants her rear guards to be able to multi-attack and also just fulfill her condition of playing the game. She won't be able to, if she locks one card, it's not like she completely loses the game, because you can still restand with one column. And also she does have cards that can restand other rear guards, so you can still have multiple attacks. The thing is, in the Lyrical cut where it's not just Artisaria, you have all these other decks that she has to play towards. She can't afford to commit to beating one deck unless half of the room is Artisaria and like, you know, the Clarissa player, it has like an IQ of over like 200, you know, like a very high IQ. It knows, oh, okay, I should just play these cards. But I think Clarissa, like in a normal day with a normal deck, won't beat Artisaria, even with like her like mid deck, like a mid list, just because of the core of Clarissa. For Tia, now this is interesting because I will still say that Artisaria has the advantage. However, Fortia has a really strong early game that she can just kill before Artisaria gets to do her thing. So it's completely possible that she's neutral. However, Fortia has to go first. Because if Artisaria goes first, you have one turn of actually pressuring your opponent, and then they just lock one of your rear guards and Fortia loses. So I'm putting her well, Fortia is disadvantaged. Artisaria is advantaged against Fortia because one lock can essentially secure you so much pressure because Fortia doesn't scale and she can't even restand. So next, Licia Phil. Honestly, I think Licia Phil is neutral for now. I think she can become advantaged against Artisaria, but I think Licia Phil having the ability to just clear most of her rear guard circles, a restander that could just you know, attack, and you know, you can play Yuika in this specific matchup or just in your deck because Yuika's not a bad card in Licia Phil. Because you have a bunch of soul, it's just space. Licia Phil can just use her divine skill to pressure one turn, become 18k base, plus with other cards like the guard restrict, or you playing like a Strega engine with the new promo, which is called High Five, you could close out games faster than you think against Artisaria. But I can also see a world where if the player doesn't play that, and Artisaria can lock your restander. Now you have another restander that you can still use, potentially, but you don't get that extra attack. And after your divine skill, you're not getting that pressure. However, she still has triple drive, so you're able to essentially draw as much or equal to as Artisaria. Next is Fennel. Honestly, I think Fennel is in the advantage here because not only Fennel can get a crit regardless of your opponent's grade, she also isn't as pressured against Artisaria as Fennel. I mean, she's not pressured against Artisaria without Artisaria forcing to commit cards to pressure, because they're going to play Yuika to pressure Fennel. But Fennel has the orders, so I can say, well, would you like to bot deck Yuika? And Yuika is an essential piece in their strategy, as well as the new double R that allows you to just bounce back your Persona Shield ticket. And that card is on the board. So either they allow you to draw, which helps Fennel more in surviving and getting key pieces, or Artisaria loses a key piece to their strategy. So it's not as bad for Fennel. And also, if there is, like, you know, if they do somehow decide to lock, you could always just still swing with the 2 columns with 2 crit and keep them at 4 damage, because this deck has no counter charge. If they're all out of CB at 4 damage, as long as you have CB and as long as you can keep playing your game plan, Fennel can still kill Artisaria. Letitia. Yeah, I'm just going to say that Artisaria is not winning. Artisaria is a little bit too slow, but she's so slow that she allows Letitia to possibly get her dress up really quickly and just kill her from that. Even if she does survive extra turn with, you know, an extra, even if Artisaria locks, sorry, it doesn't matter. Letitia is a restanding Vanguard. She's Overlord, and she's going to allow your rear guards to hit very disgusting numbers. It does not matter. She's going to get her plan off no matter what. As long as the Letitia player doesn't brick really badly, I don't think Artisaria is winning, even if they do have all this shield power. Next is Herminia. Honestly, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think that she's still disadvantaged, Artisaria. Because now, yeah, you can lock one of the rear guards in the front row, but Herminia kind of doesn't care about that in a sort of way. Because even if one is locked in the front row, your other rear guard combo could be a Riley, it could be Rarako, which hits harder than Riley, by the way. And it gives Herminia enough time, since the early game is not as strong for Artisaria, to not be pressured to like guard as much, right? Even when Artisaria does get her 2 critical attacks, Herminia can still play around the fact that, well, eventually she's at 4 damage, which is the place that she wants to be at. She doesn't want to be at 3 damage. She wants to be at 4. And the Artisaria player to control the game that way, the Herminia player can control the game that way as well. Besides, if Artisaria does rush against Herminia, if it's Enduring Beauty, they're going to get punished because of that. The lock can hurt if they don't have anything to follow up on, but since Artisaria is kind of slow, like I said, it allows for me to get the time to do that. Lofa. Honestly, again, I still think Lofa is better. Well, she'll do well against Artisaria because you can balance almost all of your rear guards in the front row. Plus, you have other techs too there's a grade 2 named Ashley, which you could potentially play to not get locked in the front row. You just have it in the front row, use her other grade 3 triple R to essentially just bounce itself back, and now Artisaria can't lock the front row, so you always have your 5 attacks. Granted, your back row is open for grabs, but that doesn't necessarily matter when Lofa's hitting like 36k to 46 plus with power, and also other cards that allow her to compress the deck. Now, Artisaria can win if she goes first, I feel, because she will have enough power to kill through the hand of Lofa. But I still think, depending on like how the Lofa player actually, I'll put her in neutral for now. I think it's pretty 50-50, depending on who goes first or second. But to these decks, it doesn't matter if they go first or second. I think they'll still win. Pacifica. As much as I want to put her in like she's advantaged against Artisaria, I think she's neutral. She can clear a board. Sure, there's like 1 card on board, but her power is not like great enough to pressure against Artisaria. And especially if they play towards a more, defensive build, Pacifica's not going to cut through the hand. Unless you're like doing a very specific like 6 attack hyper, like if you're going all in on the 6 attacks on Persona Ride variation with like super set it shot or Vashimlock. But I don't think Pacifica can have enough cards in hand to survive Artisaria's super late game, and the deck can potentially be countered by Starve, but not to the point where she can't play the game. Next is Kyoka. I think Kyoka's advantaged. Just because she can clear a front row, she can also loot PGs from the drop zone. She doesn't scale as high as Artisaria, but again, because she's so slow, she gives Kyoka enough breathing room to essentially get her strategy thought out and her line of thinking played out. Also, the fact that, again, Kyoka can play the most broken generics in the clan. Lock doesn't really mean much to her. And also, she could get 5 to 6 attacks within her own deck without need to play weird techs. So, I think Artisaria is very disadvantaged in that category. Unless the Kyoka player just doesn't have anything to work with. But I think even going first or second, Kyoka could still do her stuff. Flam Glam. I think Flam Glam is disadvantaged against Artisaria. Flam Glam always at least has somewhat of an early game. It has compression. And even though the numbers don't hit astronomically high, the fact that is that if your opponent goes if your opponent goes first, you're not unlocked to certain abilities. Plus, if you go first, you could just start punishing them. It's like a better Fortia, except that the deck doesn't care if you lock like one rear guard. And even so, the Flame Gland player is going to be able to get back important cards that they retired, or just draw enough to survive against Artisaria. So I think Flame Gland's in a pretty good position. However, I can't see a world where if the Artisaria player does go first and just draws like the nuts, should go to neutral. But I feel like Flame Glam just does a better job. Charmu. I think Charmu's advantaged just because her rear guards clear herself. Her early game is not as strong, but she keeps scaling as the game goes on. Well, theoretically. As long as you can keep hitting your cards that keep giving Charmu power, she'll make all of your rear guards gain power, plus you get an extra drive check. Also with a new variation with high five to essentially just get back cards in your soul, or even return cards in your hand, you're able to just clear your board more frequently, and while also gaining advantage, which is good for Charmu, which Artisaria, I don't think he could bat. Again, if Artisaria goes first, she has a bit more of a chance, but Charmu hitting big numbers after big numbers is kind of hard. So to keep doing that every turn. Labrador. I think Labrador is advantaged because they're just two factors. Not just because of the bounce. I think it's because of a critical. If you can lock Artisaria to like 4 damage, they've been using most of their CB. Granted, it depends on what deck they're... Well, if they're playing a new grade 2 that draws, or a Valfer, because they need that to draw, you could lock them at 2 damage. It just essentially just keeps swinging to pressure them out like that, and hoping you drive check crits. Also, this deck is also tanky too. So the thing is, I think when it comes to like a fight where Artisaria has more defensive cards, I think she can win. But Labrador is very aggressive. And also she just gets essentially free multi-attack. She cannot be damage denied unless the Labrador player misplays. Next we have Michu. I think Michu is just advantaged. She has way too much power for Artisaria to guard against all of her attacks. Plus she even has pseudo control options. So she can retire their Yuika. Plus prevent intercepts. So if they do have like specific cards on their board, they can't intercept with it. While also she just gets like 4 drive checks in the turn with high power, while also riding down to Nukino to a grade 1, meaning they can't use specific cards to guard. So I think that's what makes Michu like really strong against this matchup. Her early game might not be the strongest, but it's still really good. Kairi, again, I think she's advantaged. Just because, A, Kairi bounces a lot, so there will be nothing for her to lock. 2, her early game is just insane because she's very generic at what you could build. 3, her power can hit even higher than Artisaria or equal to Artisaria. Just because of how grade 4 Kairi works, and her support just allows her to essentially give her front row more power, or the cards themselves get power. So she's hitting very high numbers while also drawing. I don't think Artisaria can hit through all that. Chris Rain. Chris Rain is kind of interesting because lock could potentially hurt, but then again, this is Chris Rain with Franchette, so I don't think she'll do as much because Chris Rain is just like a weaker version of Kairi, except that rather than focusing on like a bunch of draw power, Chris Rain can give a bunch of power to her rears. Plus we have high 5 as an order that'll be coming for English, and JP already has it, so she has a better advantage in drawing key pieces while also using Aqua's line and different other Rai lines and different strategies to combat it. Plus she also has the option to use Ashley too to prevent front row lock, so locking the back row is not as impactful for Artisaria. and I think Chris Ryan will be able to do just fine. Even the late game, Chris Ryan, as long as the player manages their CB, which we have a bunch of cards that don't need CB anymore, she's able to just do like what Labrador and Charmo's doing with like just pressure of high numbers and a crit. Sorry, like what Labrador and Koro does. Sienna, as much as I want to put her in advantage, I think it's neutral to disadvantage for Sienna, because although Sienna wants the late game to go on, she doesn't gain power over time. She does become quite annoying, but she has 2 Yurikas, so where the bind or discard does not matter. That it just doesn't matter because she has 2 cards. And binding the token doesn't do anything. However, I will say there are some moments where Sienna can gain a lot of advantage early game because you're essentially able to attack, and if you do play Yurika, you're able to just have safe aggression in that sense. But also there's other cards you can play too for Sienna to boost her power, like her grade 1 that allows her to get 10k power. Doing that every turn while also bouncing back your opponent's tokens, because you can choose them and they will disappear, meaning they'll have to rebuild them, which is a very difficult thing for Artisaria to do, because most of the time, unless you're going against like a massive control deck, they leave the tokens. But Sienna can specifically target them in the front row, meaning she will have to rebuild them. So even though she recalls them from her Vanguard skill, in the beginning of her turn, she has to commit more cards in order to hit those power thresholds. And without Yuikas or the grade 1s, it's going to be kind of difficult. So that's why I'm putting Sienna at neutral for now, because it can easily go either way. But as you can see on this chart, that we have a lot of decks that are advantaged against Artisaria, or I feel they are advantaged. And there's only a couple that are disadvantaged. And like the caveat is that I think Sagita just doesn't have enough power. I don't even think it's because of the lock. It's just because she doesn't have enough of anything to do much against Artisaria. Runa is just not developed, same as Sagita. Forenza is just a bad matchup. Clarissa, I don't think she had that super bad of a matchup. It's just that she needs to play around Artisaria plus all the other decks. It's not advantage for her. And for Tia, you get 1 turn, I feel, before you just straight lose. But that's just how I feel. But as we can see here, a lot of decks are either neutral or disadvantaged. But also it comes to the Artisaria player too. Sometimes they can make a misplay where it's a good opportunity to use a turn to lock a card or to just gain advantage. But I feel like most of the time, if I'm basing this based off if the Artisaria player is like, really knowledgeable about all the decks and what could possibly happen, and they have like the correct plays in mind, minusing triggers, I think still it will be kind of hard for the Artisaria player to fight against decks that just don't care about the lock, or they hit hard or fast enough to beat Artisaria. Because even with the crit, most of these decks that she's disadvantaged in can just draw enough to just sustain themselves pretty fine. The middle decks can either draw enough or it's just luck how they can. While, the decks she's advantaged against, they just straight up lose to lock or have a disadvantage against it. So hopefully this explains my thoughts and my feelings and thoughts on the decks that Artisaria are good against, or neutral against, and disadvantage against. So let me know what you guys think about your favorite lyrical deck in this tier list, and if they're good against Artisaria or not. And let me know if you're interested in Artisaria, because I will be doing more videos like this in the future. So without further ado, I'm Zenarion, and I'm signing off.